Ever wonder about those movies left to rot away on streaming sites? Well, wonder no more. Hello, and welcome to a brand new podcast called Stumblebum. I am your host, Howard Casner, formerly the host of the Pop Art Podcast. However, I had to put that one on hiatus and have begun a new one. What is Stumblebum, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you did. Stumblebum is a movie podcast that would focus on films that I just, well, stumbled over. I'd never heard of them before, knew nothing about them, but they intrigued me. We will be taking a closer look at those films that have been ignored or forgotten in order to discover what they have to offer and if they deserve a second chance. In addition, I will have a guest for each episode. This time around, it is Richard Kirkham, a fellow film enthusiast. So, Richard, why don't you tell the audience something about yourself?
Oh, I'm a longtime film fan. I grew up in Southern California, in the LA area, so I was a regular in the Hollywood film community. I saw a lot of movies, saw a lot of premieres, went to the studios, did all that kind of stuff, but I was never in the business myself. Uh, about 15 years ago, actually 16 years ago, I started a movie blog. And then a few years after that, I became a regular member on a podcast, a weekly podcast that I since have become the host for and have been running ever since. That's the LAMBcast, which is the official podcast of the large association of movie bloggers. And you've been a regular guest on the LAM, thankfully. I can always count on you when I need another guest. And you've been great showing up, and I'm always happy to show up for you.
And I'm always so happy to show up more. So, uh, thank you for having me on so many times. It's been a great deal of fun. First, a warning for our viewers. This will not be a spoiler-free podcast. If you want to be as surprised as I was, you may want to view the movie and then come back to us. The film this time is None Shall Escape. It is a war film released in 1943. It's directed by Andre Detour and written by Lester Cole from a story by Alfred Newman and Joseph Thon. Newman and Thon received an Oscar nomination for Best Story back when they had that award. It stars Marcia Hunt, Alexander Knox, and Henry Travers. The story begins after World War II, where Wilhelm Grimm is being tried for war crimes in his Polish hometown. His deeds are recounted in flashbacks. Bitter after Germany losing World War I, he now looks down on his fellow townspeople, and after raping a young woman, he is forced to leave. But he returns from the village when it is taken over by Germany, and he becomes a ruthless Nazi in charge of his former townspeople. So, Richard, let's start with the basic question. What was your reaction to the film?
I was surprised I'd never heard of it before because it's actually a pretty good film and it's solid when it comes to depicting the idea of war crimes. What's really fascinating to me is the fact that this film was made. It's obviously a propaganda piece too, but it was made during the war, not after the war. During the war, it's set after the war. At least the start of the film is, and then it goes to a series of flashbacks that go all the way back to 1919. But it's like the Nuremberg trials is being given a fictional story 2 years before they happen. And it was kind of interesting to me that they had that format and they took it pretty seriously. I thought they did a nice job setting it up and making it work for what they were doing. Obviously, all the niceties of the legal process and the what the rights are and who gets to testify and how they get to testify. That's all contrived for the purpose of the dramatic film story, but it's not too different than it might have been in real life. And so I think that that gives it a lot of what's the phrase, verisimilitude. It's very authentic in a lot of ways. I thought it was also interesting when they showed the panel of people at the beginning who are going to sit in judgment, that you had a very diverse cast there. There were Asians and Africans and people of a variety of ethnicities. So it does really feel like the United Nations World Court for the United Nations existed. Uh, I was Also very impressed with
Well, that is
the
interesting,
lead
that last
performer.
thing you mentioned,
Yes, go ahead.
Alexander Knox. Oh, I was going to say the last thing you said about the diverse uh, uh, jury, the diverse jury, sorry. Um, that was controversial. The head of the studio, originally it was 4 Black members. And the head of the studio said, you can't do that. Will never be shown in the South. So the compromise was to have 1 Black juror there. Uh, but also what you said about it being made in 19, well, it was made in 1943, released in 1944, 18 months before the war even ended. This was when they were barely talking about it. Franklin Roosevelt was coming up with the idea of doing this. And so the head of the studio thought, oh, this will be a good idea. And had a story made from it and then had a screenplay made for it and then got it made. He was very nervous about it, but he also supported it very much as well. So I like to say that it was about war crimes before a war crimes trial, before such a thing existed, and before it was even a glint in the eye of Stanley Kramer, who did Judgment at Nuremberg. Uh, but you were talking about Alexander Knox.
Yes, I started to talk about him. I didn't recognize him at first. I was not familiar with his work. When I checked his background, I did see that he was in a movie that I had seen before, Wilson, and he got an Academy Award for that film. That was came out, I think, a year and a half, 2 years after this movie was made. I thought that he was really good in the part at the beginning of the film. He's kind of an attractive young man. You can see he's returning from the war damaged, somebody who's got bitterness in him, and obviously with his war wounds is feeling a little bit maligned and out of place in the home village that he starts to condescend to. And I thought that was an interesting transition. It's we don't see everything that happened to him, but we get see enough to know why he is bitter and to know that he was not that way before the war happened. And so he was clearly influenced by his experiences in the war and the bitterness about how he thinks that the army was betrayed by the political system, which is, of course, the roots of the Nazi Party in the first place. So it's interesting how they actually authentically kind of show the development of that whole political ideology through this one person. Of course, they also make him somebody who is pretty reprehensible uh, with committing a crime against a young girl who then subsequently commits suicide, and he escapes justice simply because the primary witness against him is dead now, and so there's not really any way that they can convict him, but everybody knows that he committed the crime, and he's certainly not going to be, he's going to be persona non grata in that community when he leaves, and he flees with his tail between his legs, and I thought that was pretty effective. And he goes to another part of Germany. This is when Poland was controlled by Germany in large sections, and there's a whole political subplot that goes on about how Poland is now going to be independent, and he's resentful of that, and how he sees the Poles as being inferiors. So you get all that Nazi BS planted early on in the film. And I like the way he goes with his, whipped persona to his brother and kind of starts over again. And you can just see that he's fallen in with the Nazis and it's going to be crappy when they get in charge.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Alexander Knox because that's one of the reasons why I decided to watch it. I found this film on YouTube, just, you know, as we do, just surfing through it. I had never heard of it before, and there were a few reasons I decided to watch it. I'm a big fan of the golden age of Hollywood, of course. I'm sure no one's going to be surprised about that. But there were also a number of very small World War II films made at the time that were more driven by characters and unknown events rather than the battles themselves, like the moon is down and things of that nature. So that I've always found interesting. Uh, and there's quite a few of them out there. And addition, as she said, it was starred Alexander Knox, who I've always been intrigued by. One of the reasons is because after receiving an Oscar nomination for the title role in Wilson, he became little more than a working actor. Uh, I never understood what had happened, though I do now because of research. But when I see his name in a film, I'm curious to watch it. And finally, the subject matter, a war crimes trial. Um, I did not know it was made in 43, released in 44 when I watched it. I found that out afterwards. Uh, so, but we agree that Alexander Knox, yes, is very good in this film. Did you have some favorite scenes from the film?
I thought, when you asked me about that in the notes, I thought about it and I thought there are a couple of scenes that I think are very similar, but they're interesting contrasts, and both of them center around meals. I like when Wilhelm comes to his brother's house and is immediately greeted and sits down at a meal with his brother and sister-in-law and their children, and he begins pontificating about the new hero and starting to display his roots in the Nazi party, so obviously the dinner table becomes a place where these kinds of things get discussed. And then there's a later scene when he's returned to the village that he's now going to be in charge of, where he has his own food brought into the house of his former fiance that he is, very bitter about not having married. And you know, he knows that they can't serve him a meal that's going to be appropriate because everybody in that village is close to starving, but he has his food brought there, and then he uses that opportunity to do the same kind of thing, pontificating about the Nazis and how they are superior and how the Polish, and there's a recurring joke that says, what Polish army? Because obviously the Nazis had succeeded in conquering Poland in 20 days or less, and it's as if there wasn't any Polish army whatsoever. And I just like those two different scenes set around the dinner table with the politics of the day being discussed from an early perspective and from the perspective that it's coming later on when the Nazis are in control. Maybe the most dramatic scene, of course, comes toward the end when the local Jews are being herded onto the boxcars, and we get the first hints, I think, in the entertainment industry about what the Nazis were really doing. Look, everybody knew that there were concentration camps. What they didn't necessarily know was that those concentration camps were death factories, the way that they were being run. And so there's even a couple of times when it's referred to his brother having been sent to a concentration camp, and you're going, well, what kind of concentration camp was he in? Because he comes out of the war, I won't say healthy, but he certainly isn't, he didn't die in the ovens anywhere. So it's not quite clear. I get the impression that we knew crappy stuff was going on. We didn't know quite all the stuff that was going on, and we just treated it the best we could in making this particular movie. But that scene where they machine gun all of the Jews after the rabbi tries to lead a revolt, I thought that was also a very good scene.
Yes, some people knew everything that was going on, but the vast majority of people in the US uh, probably wouldn't know. Uh, there's a lot we don't know today that's going on in other areas. We might know more now because of social media and the ability to uh,
You turn on Google and look everywhere.
right, look everywhere. Um, but for me, that scene at the railroad station where they just mow down that group of Jewish prisoners is a very powerful scene. And it is supposed to be the first scene ever that dramatizes the real atrocities that the Nazis were committing at the time. I also was very taken with the scene where they take over the synagogue and they turn it into a stall for the horses.
Right.
So that was, yeah, that was sort of thing. Um, the uh, the director was Andre de Twelve. This is not his best known film. You do know his best known film, and that is House of Wax
Oh yeah.
in 3D.
And famously made by a guy who doesn't have any depth perception because he's only got one eye. I wonder
Right.
if there's any connection to the character that he's filming in this particular story.
Well, that could be. I'm sure some of how people reacted to him might have seeped in. Um, but he became famous also, or is much better known now because of a series of westerns he did, especially with Randolph Scott. And this was a subgenre of westerns called psychological westerns, and it was a transition between the westerns of John Ford and then uh, the westerns that began in the 60s and 70s, where they were trying to make a more realistic view of the West and look at it more psychologically. So, uh, it's not mythic. They were trying to get away from the myth, and this led to uh, what happened later on. Obviously, if you want to know what was going on in America, really on in America, you watch psychological westerns, you watch the sci-fi, and you watch the film noir, and that tells you everything you need to know about what's going on in the system. Um, you think the story.
Well, Howard, I missed what you said. The screen froze a little bit, and so whatever your question was, I have no idea.
Okay. What did you think of the screenplay? It was by Lester Cole and then uh, uh, okay, Joseph
Yeah, the story was
Ton
from the
and
two guys. Yeah. I think the story is interesting. Like I said, it covers that period of, I guess it's about 23 years. I get maybe 25 years we would look at it when the war is over officially, from the end of World War I to the end of World War II. And we see, we skip chunks of time, but we see the progress of this one guy, as he becomes embittered. That bitterness turns him into an acolyte of Hitler, how he gains power and abuses the power just like all petty tyrants do, and has no compassion whatsoever, even up to the point where he ultimately murders his nephew that is his surrogate son. And
That was a
I,
pretty
I,
cold
you
scene.
know, and the very last, yeah, it was. I thought there was even a colder scene earlier in the film when he sends the girl that the nephew is interested in to be to the officers club, which is a
Or you might
euphemism
say
for the
officers club,
Nazi whorehouse.
right?
Yeah, you
Um,
know, and that was pretty cold-blooded, also, and obviously murdering somebody is especially in a church during you know, the equivalent of it's not a funeral service. What do they call it?
Awake,
When they're administering last
memorial.
rites, that. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So. So it's happening then, and that's brutal. And at the very end, when he's at the trial, he takes the exact approach that a lot of the Nazis would take. You know, uh, I was doing the right thing. You know, most of them didn't necessarily deny what they were doing. They just said, this we were taking care of things, and I mean he basically suggests that the Nazis are going to come back. It's like saying the South will rise again, the Nazis will be back. And that's really supposed to be a warning to us all to make sure that we don't let it happen. And that's why those trials will be necessary when they actually do occur.
I would also like to point
So I
out
thought that was very clever.
it is, yes, yeah, that is. It was so prescient about what was going to happen, much more accurate, as I think you mentioned earlier, than one would expect from a film written before it was even ultimately decided that this would happen. It would be interesting to find out what people thought of it if the Nuremberg trials never happened. That would be uh, an interesting take to
I
see.
think it would be an interesting companion piece if you watched the film from last year, Nuremberg, with Russell Crowe and
Right.
Remy Malek, and this film, as kind of a double feature. It's an interesting contrast in the way the tribunals happen and the way they address the issues. But this one gives us a lot more context about what's going on. It's it is a story about people, of course, but it's ultimately about how this movement became in control and what it was doing. And
In many
I
ways, it just seems like a odd movie for the
yes,
US to make during the war.
it you can see a lot of war movies that were made during the war that were about fighting battles and being heroic and secret missions and the threats to the world from the Nazis and the spies and all those kinds of things. There's a lot of that kind of stuff, but this one is really it feels like it's out of left field. It says we're going to assume that we're going to win this war and we're going to take it to these people for the horrible things that they've done. And we think they've done a lot of horrible things, and we're just going to portray them as best we can on screen. And of course, even if they knew everything that was going on in the detail, they probably wouldn't have portrayed it on screen in 1943 for theater audiences.
The I do want to give a shout out to Henry Travers, who plays the pastor.
He was the
Uh,
first person I recognized in the movie.
yes, he
I said,
was
"It's Clarence."
one of the best or most memorable supporting character actors under contract for the studios.
And you've frozen again. I'll just wait. It'll catch up.
The verge of it with Wilson. And then, well, he was blacklisted. He went to England. He was more gray-listed than blacklisted. So he went to England. And there he never could quite get the film roles equal to Wilson. Uh, he more made B movies, thrillers, things like that. They're often fun to watch, but they just don't have the cachet of Wilson. It also didn't help that Wilson was a major flop, an embarrassing one, in fact. So, um, do you have any theories or ideas as to why this film has sort of disappeared? It was sort of not around for 70 years.
Well, I think, look, it came out when there were a lot of films about the war, like I said, from other perspectives. And then we got in the early 60s, we got Judgment at Nuremberg, and we got several other films. And it just seemed like those were dealing with it in a more contemporary way. And the old school approach of, well, let's put it on a sound stage. We'll create this jury on the
Mhm.
stage, and we'll have this mock trial. That feels like something from, the Devil and Daniel Webster, or Metropolis, or something like that. It feels old school. So it probably felt old fashioned to people for a long time, and they said, well, nobody's going to be interested in this. And the truth is, a lot of movies get shunted aside because they feel old fashioned to the folks who are making decisions about what to promote, what to put on physical media, what to purchase for their streaming site, that kind of thing. Uh, makes me thankful all the time whenever TCM runs a movie like this, and I go, somebody gives a damn about this kind of stuff. I just wish more people did.
Well, I think you make a very good point there. In fact, when it came out, it didn't quite connect to the audience as strongly as it might because, as you said, most people didn't really know how horrible things were over there, so they weren't quite sure what to make of this film. Then after the war, Lester Cole, the writer, was blacklisted. And then they actually had the Nuremberg trials, and that so overshadowed it that, as I think you're right, it seemed quaint. Uh,
That's a
working
quaint fiction, and we had the reality in front of us that we
right.
could then dramatize later on.
So I think those are all good reasons. But do you think it is worth revisiting and watching now?
Oh yeah, no, I think people like you and I who like older movies and don't mind the fact that, the styles are a little bit different and the acting is maybe not the same kind of naturalism that we see in more contemporary films, will definitely be glad to watch the movie. And I think other people should appreciate it as well. Like there are a ton of these films that have looked at the Holocaust over the years that are certainly important and horrifying to look at and think about. This does put it in a drama story more than a kind of a horrific fictionalized version of the misery that took place. It's so, like I said, you said it too, the tone is a little bit different. It's probably something that more modern audiences, they have to kind of go into it with a certain mindset and say, okay, I got to give this a chance to
Right.
watch, because it's not going to go the way I think it should go. It's going to go a different way, but that doesn't mean that it isn't worth watching. I think it's worth watching.
And I saw it on YouTube. Is that where you saw it?
Yes. Yes. You suggested places that I could find it, and I subscribe to YouTube, so I get to see all the movies. I think it was free even if you aren't
It was.
subscribing to YouTube.
I
Yeah,
saw it
so
for free. So I'm a cheapskate.
no problem.
So let's start closing out. And the question I have is, can you share a movie that you have just stumbled over and decided to watch? Something you hadn't heard of before. It can be a good one or a bad one you recommend or one you warn us away from with all good speed.
Okay, well, I will do that exactly because yesterday, I think it was yesterday, might have been the day before, I watched a movie that I stumbled across. I, like a lot of people, I'm just flipping through streaming channels, trying to find something interesting. Sometimes I've got a break between events that are going on. I think we were going to the movie on Sunday and Sunday evening, and I needed something in the afternoon when I wasn't working on a project to watch. So I came across this thriller from, they call it a thriller. I don't know. It's a thriller from 2018, uh, called Night Hunter, with Henry Cavill and Ben Kingsley. And Stanley Tucci's in it as well.
I
And it
think
is
I've seen
not
that
good.
on Hulu, isn't it? Uh,
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that it's on Hulu. I don't remember exactly where I saw it. It was maybe Stars. You know,
well, thank you for
I,
that because I know I've gone by it and said, shouldn't I watch this? And I wasn't sure.
save your time. Watch something else. It's
Right.
the the first 10 minutes are pretty
So
good,
what is
but the rest
next
of it is
for you?
crappy.
What's going on?
They
Okay.
discovered the local police in Minnesota discover a crime that has been committed. A woman has been found dead on a timber truck, and they follow up the leads and speculate that she was escaped from somebody, that she was running away from somebody, and that she just jumped onto the timber truck to escape, or that was the only option. Dying was even maybe a better option than being caught. And then they track back to where the timber truck must have got her off of a bridge in this particular district, and they run down a house, and they get into the house, and it's one of those house of horrors kind of thing that there are closets in the basement with little windows in them that it looks like they could have kept several women in there as prisoners. And then there's a mentally deficient person who's running around in the area and appears to be the criminal, but it's hard to believe that he's the criminal because he has all kinds of problems. So they're interrogating him, trying to figure out what goes out. There's a twist that comes two-thirds of the way through the movie, and then the last act is complete stupidity.
Gee, I gotta watch that tonight. It's calling out to me. Okay, so what's next? What's happening? What are you working on?
Well, the LAMBcast is getting ready to do the movie of the month. I have to check and see what got chosen. I haven't updated my poll yet, but we are doing murder thrillers this week,
Right.
and I think Rope was in the lead the last time I looked, so we may be doing Rope. If you aren't signed up for that show, I'd love to invite you to join the show, and that's on Sunday.
Well, I think I did volunteer pretty much to do any
Yeah.
movie of the month. I don't know if you assigned it to me, but yes, I will be
I,
more than happy to do Rope.
I put the poll up. I put the poll up a little late, and it's closing today. So I'll let everybody know. Usually, I let people know a week ahead of time. This is going to be 5 or 6 days ahead of time. But the other films on the list are also easy to find. So if anybody is going to be on the show, they shouldn't have trouble finding the movie to watch. Like I
Right.
said, and last time I looked, Rope was in the lead. I'm not sure that that's the one that won, but I will let everybody know when I get off of this call with you. I have to check it. And then as usual, I'm just trying to catch
Fantastic.
up on my site.
Well, right. Yeah, you always say that on the Lambcast. You're always behind, Rich.
Somewhere along the line, I think it's in the last year, I just, instead of writing about the movie the minute I got home, I said, well, I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow became 3 days, and then it's a week. And that's the
Oh,
next thing I know, I've got 6 or 7 films. I'm going, I got to catch up. I did 4 or 5 of them this week, and I'm feeling pretty good. And then, of course, I've got 2 more movies now that I've added since then. So now I'm back to being 5 behind. I'll
yeah,
get there.
it can be overwhelming. Well, as for me, I am a script consultant and writer of all things that can possibly be written. And I'll just let that be my epithet. Um, Upcoming episodes will include such films as This is the Warning, Mr. K, Space Station 76, and many, many others. So thank you for listening. And thank you, Richard, for being my second guest on Stumblebum.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.